Welcome to today's Iris session, brought to you by BrightRock, provider of the first ever life insurance that changes as your life changes. I'm David O'Sullivan, and today we're here to talk about starting your family. Becoming a parent can be one of the most daunting and fulfilling experiences in life, but sometimes the path to parenthood can have unexpected twists and turns, leading to options like adoption, fertility treatment, or surrogacy, each option presenting unique joys and challenges of its own. Everyone who has gone or is going through this journey have different stories to share. So let's talk about it. Joining me there in the studio, I have Alexa Matthews, who is a social worker with a master's degree in play therapy. And as she tells me now, she is on extended maternity leave. She is a mum of a young adopted child. And in the background, we'll join her a little later, Jana, Zuidema, and her little one as well, another of our adopted gang that's going to be spoken about on today's show. So if you hear a little baby gurgling in the background, that's coming through from our line to Jana in Cape Town. But Alexa, we'll start with you. Maternity leave, extended maternity leave. How long has this been now?
For 7.5 months. We became a family. Well, I like to say we joined each other and we belonged to each other from December. So
I have now been reading over the past couple of days your blog.
Okay.
I read it in reverse order, which is not the way to do it, and I'm going to recommend for anybody who now wants to read your blog, scroll all the way down and go through the journey. Okay. But it's the most remarkable journey, and I actually wrote down the line that I felt was so interesting. You spoke about the sweetness of adoption, the grief of adoption, to such conflicting emotions. I understand as a father what the sweetness must be. The grief, tell me about that.
So adoption's often hyped up as this amazing thing, and you're an amazing parent, and what you're doing is amazing, and we use the word beautiful and amazing a lot. But what people forget, and what we forget, is that adoption comes at the cost of saying goodbye. Goodbye for a birth mother, and for sometimes birth father, to a child, but also for that child to its birth parent. So in adoption, there's what we call the adoption triad. It's the adoptive parent. I talk with my hands a lot, so I'm going to explain quickly.
This
Thank
is a
you.
visual medium we're on.
No, I can't say, otherwise I must sit on them. Okay, so we have the adoption triad. We have the child, we have the adoptive parent, and we have the birth parent. And in that story, there's always going to be grief and loss, as well as joy. So I have the joy of I think he's the most beautiful child. He really is. He's at home, but for me, he's my most beautiful boy. In that, I have a grief that his birth mom never gets to experience him. On his birthday, I'm conscious that the build-up to that date, his mom was getting ready to give birth to a child that she wasn't going to raise. And I'm conscious for my son that he's growing up with a mommy, firstly, who doesn't look like him. Good thing, bad thing, he can decide as he's older. But also that he's growing up with a story of having to navigate having two families, one that is familiar and known, and one that we can answer what we know about, but we're never going to be able to give them the fullness of.
I was also intrigued in one of your blog postings. You spoke about him getting used to you and him going through a grieving process. And I looked and thought, you got him when he was 6 months old, am I right?
Yeah, he was 6 months old at the time.
A 6-month-old baby grieving. I didn't think that emotion came through. And you wrote there, yes, they grieve.
Yes, they grieve.
Tell me about that.
So babies grieve. Remember, babies aren't verbal, but they still experience. So they have sensory experiences. So for him, grew under, I was chatting to someone about this now, under someone else's heartbeat. He grew listening to someone else's voice while in utero. He grew being familiar with the music, everything that was around that. She gave birth to him, and he then left the hospital with somebody else. So that would have been the first point of loss for him, and having to get used to someone else's voice, somebody else looking after him, and all those kind of things. And then when he left where he came from, the children's home he was in, he came to us. There was another big change. So what happens when babies grieve is they sometimes their eating pattern gets disturbed, their sleeping pattern gets disturbed. They can become very overcompliant, or they can become babies who cry insanely for no reason at all. And much like we do actually when we grieve, is that there's a loss that goes through for them. They don't have the verbal skills to do it. It's all a sensory experience that they're experiencing. And I saw it with my son, and ironically, well, not ironically, this was a sweet moment. The only thing that actually settled him after 4 days of being with us was me telling him his adoption story. So he was 6 months old. He sat on my lap with these big, big eyes, and I said, let me tell you why you're here. And I told him his story. And he relaxed into me and fell asleep. And
you continue to do that, don't you?
I still do that. His adoption story is part of our story. So I think it's easier because it is a transracial adoption. It's obvious. We can't pretend. But his adoption, he needs to grow up with this being part of him. It's not suddenly something that happens to him. This is part of our story. It's not his story, and he's part of our story, and his birth mom, actually. So how do we protect her and him in this, but how do we give as much information as is helpful for him?
Which also answers the question, when do you tell a child that they're adopted? Immediately, in your case.
Yeah, I think from, you want your children growing up knowing that this is part of it. So, and you give them just enough information. Obviously, if there's stuff that's distressing, we tell them that when they're ready to cope with it, with professional help if needed. But children who are adopted, it's part of their story.
Okay, well, let's go to our noise coming down the line, which is a very pleasant, cute sound of a little baby. Jana's little one. Jana, good to have you on the line as well. How's the little one doing there?
She's doing very well, thank you. She's sitting on the floor playing with her toys. Well behaved.
Let me explore your journey. What made you go the adoption route in the first place, Jana?
Well, we've been trying to have kids for about a period of 10 years, and we started initially trying naturally, and unfortunately that didn't work, and then found out that we had infertility issues, so we went the infertility route. And we went through 3 cycles of IVF, a couple of artificial inseminations, and some major surgery. And all of those were unsuccessful. And then we got to the point where we decided that we would really like children, but we didn't feel the need to have children of our own genetic gene pool. And that's where adoption was a natural decision for us. And in hindsight, if I could do it again, I think I'd leave all the infertility behind and just do the adoption from the beginning. But, that's a journey everyone has to walk if they so choose. So that's how we got to adoption, really. And it's been an amazing experience.
I can only anecdotally understand the difficulty of the IVF treatment and going that route. Not only a cost factor, but from friends and colleagues who have gone that route, I see the emotional impact it has as well. When you were going through that treatment, was adoption in your mind, or was it only after you'd exhausted the other channels that you started to get your head around adoption?
Ironically, my husband and I have been married 17 years, and when we first got married, we always said we wanted 2 kids, and we were very open to adoption. It did go back on the back burner, and then through the IVF process, no, adoption wasn't really in the forefront of my mind. I think the forefront of my mind was trying to have a child biologically. But it was very hard. If I can tell you, it was the worst thing I've ever gone through in my life. It was the hardest 5 years of my life, and I wouldn't wish it on my worst enemy. But I see now why it happened, because we came to the point of adoption, and that was the road we had to walk. That was the road that was planned for us. And in hindsight, it's amazing. But during the time, it was very hard and very painful, and I've shed many tears during that time. And as I said, I wouldn't want to wish it on anyone.
Can you just explore just a little bit for us what makes it such a painful, traumatic experience, if you will?
I think it's that hope-loss cycle. You have this hope, and then you lose it. Then you have this hope, and then you lose it. If you try and fall pregnant, if you're a woman, you know exactly what symptoms to monitor. You know what day of the month it is. You know when to do what, and when things don't work out, when you've been so meticulously planning it, it's very disappointing, particularly, I think, if you're a personality type like me that likes to have control of everything. And I just had no control. I couldn't make this happen. And we tried everything we could, as far as we could, with IVF to make it happen in our power, but we still couldn't. And I think that's the biggest loss, is this hope loss continuously. Where with adoption, you're guaranteed of a positive outcome, irrespective of the time frame it takes. Where with IVF and infertility, and even surrogacy, you're never guaranteed of a positive outcome. So it's a very hard emotional journey dealing with that hope loss continuously.
I'm going to chat to Alexa about going that route as well. And Jana, I'm going to come back to you each time to get your perspective, your story, and see to what extent it might mirror what Alexa had been through. But Alexa, for you, what made you go the adoption route?
Well, I met my husband, I was a bit older when I got married, so I was in my late 30s. I've always wanted to adopt. In fact, in my 20s, I used to say to people, I just have this feeling I'm going to look after children that I didn't give birth to. So when we were trying to suss out whether we were the ones for each other, we started having a conversation then already about, if we did get together, how would we grow a family? And adoption was on the table from day one. To the point that when we got married, being pregnant, it took me 6.5 months to get my head around the possibility that that was one way to grow my family. We did have a miscarriage, and it was always just a conversation about what do we do first. Do we do the adoption route first, or we do a birth baby first? And after the miscarriage, Charlie's my wonderful husband, looked at me and he just said, babe, it's time. And so the doctors say I could fall pregnant really easily if I wanted to, but I'm not petrified of falling pregnant because I really quite like adoption, which sounds like a very odd thing to say, but it's just, this is what I believe, this is how I believe I'm meant to mother. And
it doesn't sound ridiculous to me. It was there to any extent what Jana was talking about, that sense of the hope loss, that you didn't want to hope and find there was another miscarriage?
No, to be quite honest, I talk about the miscarriage as my permission baby for my son. And so I worked through a lot of guilt around the fact that I didn't grieve that miscarriage in a way that I think society expects us to when we talk about losing a pregnancy, for people who do grieve that. And I've got friends who struggled with infertility, have adopted. And so our stories are a little bit different in that way, because for me it was very much about this is how I wanted to grow my family.
It does seem to me from reading your blog that you probably were more prepared than most for adoption. You spoke about how this was part of your psyche when you were a youngster. But as a social worker, am I right, you used to work with people and counsel people on the process of adoption?
So I've worked with families, I've worked with children from children's homes prior to being adopted, and then I've worked with families after adoption and children who have been adopted to just work through some of the challenges, I guess, that come up. And they will. So our children go through all their normal developmental stuff, and then there's some stuff as they're growing, which all our kids have, whether they're from divorce backgrounds or just changed families, whatever it is, that they've got extra tasks. And so that's part of the therapy that I've been involved in doing.
So do you feel that you am I right in saying you were probably a lot more prepared for the challenges of adoption than most others?
I think intellectually, yes, but I think when you become the mom, you're the mom.
Yeah.
So when you're the mom, then it's about, okay, what does this mean? So intellectually, I understand a lot, I think, and I can explain and I can rationalize and I can give you a textbook. But when I watch the stuff and I see my son and I think about the grief in the process, I still had to work through all of that as well. And so I think, the one hand, I can understand a lot better, but that doesn't take away the emotional challenges of this is the process we're in now.
Were you surprised possibly by the intensity of emotion? The intensity of that, of understanding the grief part of the adoption cycle?
I'm very emotional in who I am in my being. I think maybe what surprised me is the vehemence at which and how strongly I feel about a lot of the stuff that's come through. I always felt passionate about it. But now that I'm an adoptive mom and I've got a little boy, the tiger mom comes out and is combined with the professional stuff. And so I think that has surprised me a little bit and has become a blind spot that I need to check sometimes in how I engage. I'm
curious to hear about Tiger Mom. I think I have a sense of where it came up. You've written about being Tiger Mom. Don't touch my baby was one particular incident. Jana, to you, if we could explore your preparation. Once you'd taken the decision now to adopt, what was the journey like from there? How did you and your husband then prepare for this little life that was going to come in and join yours?
Okay. Can I just quickly go back to just how I've had a different experience to Alexa with regards to the infertility side. I think anyone who's gone through infertility needs to mourn that before they go through to the adoption process. It's very important to mourn it. You know, infertility is a loss, and you have to deal with that loss like you would if you have lost a loved one. You have to go through the processes of grieving. And that process needs to come to an end before you get to the adoption road. Adoption mustn't be a plug to try and fill a hole, because it will be putting a square into a round hole. So that's really, I think, I'd like to share that with anyone thinking about adoption who've also gone through the infertility process. I found that paramount in my own experience. But with regards to the adoption process, it was actually really easy, much easier than infertility, surprisingly enough. We had a very short waiting time with our first child, so we were only on the waiting list for 6 weeks when we got the phone call. So it was a little bit exciting and daunting all at once, because I've been telling myself for 5 years I won't have children, I'm not going to have children, I'm going to invest myself in my career. And then within 3 months of starting the process to delivery, in a way, we had a baby. So it was a bit overwhelming for me from that point of view. The process itself, the paperwork, the application, that was quite easy, but it was for me an overwhelming sense from not thinking I'm ever going to have children for 5 years to within 3 months having a baby. That was quite overwhelming. And as Alexis says, you know, recognizing the grief of the biological mother and admiring her, what she's done for us. And then obviously dealing with a baby that has grieves in their own way. that was also quite an emotional, overwhelming time for me. But it's like anything. I think if you have a new baby, if you're a first-time mom, even if you've carried it for 9 months, I think it's an overwhelming situation and experience. But the whole process was really not that difficult. It's quite simple, it was actually really much easier than I anticipated.
But when you say a simple process, are you talking about the administrative process? Because I'm quite curious to get into what it's like emotionally to prepare yourself. Do you recommend people should be going for some kind of counseling ahead of time so that they are properly prepared? I mean, I'm a father of 2 kids, and I was bombarded with advice on what it's like to have children, and I find that trusting your instincts is probably the easiest advice ever to get. Adopting a child, I think, comes with a whole set of different challenges that possibly are not easily, the solutions to which are not easily found. Was 6 weeks enough time for you to properly understand what you were getting yourself into?
No, definitely not. Not from an emotional or a physical or a practical point of view. I mean, we didn't even know how to put a nappy on. We had to read the Pampers packet pictures to work out how to put a nappy on. We had no prep time. But from the emotional point of view, yes, I suppose that was, I think because it went so fast, there wasn't much time to prep for it. But I always remember I had a friend, she had children many years ago, prior to us even trying to want children, and she said to me, and I'd never forget this, she said, when the baby came out of me, I didn't love it straight away. That love grew. And my biggest fear with the adoption was, am I going to love this child who is not of me? And I've always remembered what my friend said, that even with a biological child, she didn't love it as it arrived in the world. That love grew as the relationship grew. And that's how I've experienced adoption. So that was one of my fears, but I remembered what my friend said to me. And I can echo that. You know, the day our first and our second child arrived, there wasn't an over emotion of love. There's this natural sense of protection, I think, that any mother feels. But there wasn't this over emotion of love. But that love has grown as the relationship has grown. And I think that's appropriate in any relationship. As you spend time with someone, your love grows for them. So that was my biggest fear with regards to the emotional side of adoptions. Am I going to love this child? And yes, you do, is the answer.
It's a very interesting perspective. Alexa, was that a similar sentiment for you?
I think so. Very much what Jana was saying is, I think that, I mean, I remember looking at my son when I met him for the first time. And my husband burst into tears. And I have a photo of a friend who gave birth to a baby, and his expression and my husband's expressions on meeting their children were identical. In fact, it were mirror images as they met their children. That came one through natural birth and one through adoption. For me, I remember looking at this little boy thinking, am I okay to be your mom? Am I okay to be your mom? Am I going to be able to do what you need me to do to be your mom? And then, I looked at him and I was like, okay, cool, we're going to do this. And I think exactly how Jana's put it, is that any relationship, I mean, when you meet someone, you might be attracted to them, you might think they're cute, you might think, oh, but the love part of that process grows. And it's a dance that we get to know each other, and you read it in the blog, we get to know each other's dance.
Yeah.
And so what is it that you need when you need, and how do we figure that out? And as long as I'm committed to continually showing up, and you committed to continually, in your baby way, and my son is quite assertive now, letting me know what you need, and he is, we will figure it out. And that's my commitment. And I think that you spoke a little bit, just to backtrack, about the prep. Different adoption processes have got different levels of preparation in them. And so depending on who you go through for your adoption process depends on how much counseling you do get in advance, in terms of your interviews, in terms of your screening, in terms of your follow-up, in terms of what you read and what you don't read. And I think exactly like Jana said, the biggest thing is that while you're waiting for that call, some people end up with complete nurseries and have read all the parenting books. And some people like Jana get the Pampers packet as their parenting guide. And it depends on that waiting. It depends on where you are in your process and all of those things. So everybody's story is going to be different on that.
I have found that all the books and the Pampers packet, it actually boils down to the same thing at the end of the day.
Put the nappy on.
You tend to get it right at the end of the day. I was also interested, Jana used this expression which you used in your blog as well. You don't talk about a phone call from the adoption agency. You talk about the phone call. It's not it's the phone call. Jana, I'm going to come to you because I want to hear about the phone call. Tell me about the phone call.
I'm having a good giggle because the call, our social worker, Rose, who's actually a friend of ours now as well, phoned me, and we have this thing. Our social worker said to this, they're never going to phone us until it's the call because they don't want to get our hopes up. And I just had lunch with a family member, a cousin, who was driving back to Somerset West, where our adoption agency is. And this number popped up on my phone. And I thought, oh my goodness. And actually, I'd just been finishing in the bathroom. So I picked the phone up thinking maybe something's happened to my cousin. And it was Rosie saying, Alexa, where are you? Have you checked your inbox? And it's the most insane feeling in the world, because once you're on that adoption register, you don't know when that call's going to come. And your heart grows, your heart enlarges and makes space for this baby. And I didn't know whether to laugh or to cry or what to do. And then so I said to Rose, get off the phone so I can open my inbox. And we had a look. And my husband got the email in his inbox at work. So I phoned him immediately and I said, have you opened your laptop? Have you opened your email at least? And he was half in tears. And he just said, I don't need to see any pictures. This is our baby. Yes, yes. This is ours. This is ours. And I think it's one of the most overwhelming feelings and then the next thing that happened is, oh my goodness, what the heck have we done? Are we ready for this? In the same 5-minute gap of laughing, crying. It was, when you get everybody that's had the call knows where they were when that call happened. I don't know, Jana, you can.
Yeah, where was your call? when you got the call, Jana? You've had two.
Well, we've had two the calls so far, because we have 2 adopted kids. And I just want to say the second call wasn't any less nerve-wracking than the first one. I thought it would be easier the second time around. So I was actually in a second-hand baby shop looking at prams when I got the call for the first one. And I had to say to the social worker, just wait, I can't speak to you, I'm so overwhelmed. And I rushed home and we phoned her back, and my husband was home and we had her on speakerphone. So because my husband's a lot more rational than I am, because I think I was flapping. And then with the second one, the adoption agency phones you on a Tuesday. So every Tuesday, I was checking my cell phone about 1,000 times to see if I'm going to get a call. Whenever the telephone rang, my stomach would drop, and I'd have the sense of sort of excitement and nervousness. And then we got the call, and it was as overwhelming and exciting as the first time. You know, it's quite a surreal experience, adoption, because they send you an email with photographs and they say, this is your baby. And it's not like buying a car where you say, oh, I think I want a red one or a blue one, or I want mag wheels, whatever. You know, it's quite surreal, but maybe that's the same when you have a biological child. When it comes out and you look at this and you think, oh, this is mine. You know, but yeah, the call is definitely an experience that adoptive parents go through, and that's an amazing experience. Overwhelming, but amazing.
Now, we have spoken about your initial bonding and how the love grows. So let's take it forward a couple of steps. And now you've established this relationship, you're feeling the bond with the child. How much of a presence in your head does the biological mother have at this stage? Are you able to put the biological mother out of your brain? Should you be doing that, Jana? What is your approach?
Okay, so she never is out of our brains. She's very part of both our children's biological mother, very part of their lives. We talk about them regularly, especially my 4-year-old, who's now starting to understand a bit more about what adoption is. She's very aware of that. And then with regards to the baby, I talk about her about her adoptive mom often, just so that it becomes, as Alexa said, it's a very natural thing. You know, you've got brown eyes, you're adopted, you have a biological mother, just one of those facts. So that's the bonding then obviously grew. And I found it interesting with my first child. I was very aware of the biological mom within the first few months of adopting her, particularly when I was cutting her fingernails, because she doesn't have fingers like either my husband or I. And then as time grew on, I sort of, that doesn't feature anymore now. But now with my current baby, which we've now had 4 months, that same experience has come back. So when I cut my current baby's fingernails, I often think of the biological mom, because again, it's almost like a little reminder that this child is mine, but is not of me. I think as the eldest daughter's grown a bit older, I think I'm probably less aware on a daily reminder of a biological mom, although I never forget that my child's adopted, but she is my child. I don't see her that is my adopted child. I see her as my child. But with the baby now, I'm a bit more aware again of the biological mom. And when I look at my baby, I can see the biological mom in her. So it is a daily reminder, but it's a bittersweet reminder. It's not It's not a sort of a negative thing. It's bittersweet, and it's more a sense of I have love and care for this biological mother who has blessed us with such a beautiful blessing. So,
as Jana said, bittersweet. I heard you agreeing, Alexa. Give me your perspective.
I think the reality is that different adoptive moms have a different relationship towards biological parents and birth parents. I think it sounds like Jana and I are quite similar in terms of this mom is present and she's part of our story. And for me, when my son turned 1 and the build up to his first birthday, I wept for this mom. He was building up to the first anniversary of when she relinquished her child. For whatever reason, it doesn't matter what, no one dreams of giving your child up for adoption. That's no woman's dream. And so whether it's an abandonment or a relinquishment or whatever it is, there's a part of me that's sad for both moms. But for my son's mom, we've had to make decisions. When I took him for his first haircut, in Xhosa culture, boys go for their first haircut, or babies get their haircut when they turn 1. And I was like, is this honoring her as I'm doing this? And not because I feel like there's a little part of me that wants her to say, you've done a good job with our child, because he is our child. But there's also part of me that thinks, like, how do I honor her and him together in our story as the three in that triad? And where he was recently very ill, he was in hospital, and part of me just thought, like, I wonder what his birth mom would feel knowing that he was here, and how my mother heart is breaking for my child while we're trying to figure out what's going on with him. But what would I say to his birth mom about how I'm mothering him and the choices that I make? And they're my choices, but there is a little part of me that thinks, like, I wanted to know that I'm doing the best that I can to honor her and him in our story and still be truly uniquely our family. And so I think that's a big part of it. When his first tooth cut is, I think, when he started walking, he sat at 6 months, crawled at 7 months, and walked at 10 months. And at each of those milestones, I was like, my heart ached, because I thought, look at this amazing boy, and she doesn't get to see that.
You, prior to adoption, or once you got the call, do you delve into where he's from and the circumstances which has led to him being put up for adoption?
So obviously with your abandoned babies, there's a different process that then unfolds in terms of what the social workers are responsible for. But for children that have been relinquished, where their birth moms have been involved with a social worker, you get that entire history. That's part of the package that you get. So you will get his medical history, his birth mother's history, as much information as is possibly known, which is a gift for our children when we can give it to them, because as they ask questions and grow, obviously as adoptive parents, we've got answers for them. So that information we do have. But there's no names, there's no identifying information in that space. I can't go and track her down. She can't come track us down. And all the correspondence that happens in terms of the delving happens through the social workers. And I think that's best. It protects the birth mother, it protects our adopted children, and it protects our families.
It's not always the case, isn't there? No. There can be a time in the child's life, I think, when they reach age of maturity, they can actually go and seek out their biological parents, should they so choose.
When they turn 18, they can do that. But what professionally we advocate is that children do that through the social work process, because there's fantasies that develop. Adoptive children do have fantasies around their parents that are missing, which is very normal and quite healthy, in fact, in terms of how they're coping. But what we want to do is a journey with them. So there's stories I've heard of where a birth mother tracked down her daughter using a private detective agency and not through the social work system, which was a horrible shock for this adoptee to have this man arrive in her place of work and say, these are the connections. And so that's not so healthy. Social media has posed a massive challenge in that. And so how do we protect our children? Because we're proud of our kids. We want to brag about our children. How do we protect our children using social media, using Instagram, Facebook, Twitter? Because people are finding each other through those media. So what do we do in that space is another challenge. So at 18, you can go through the social work system. But also looking at social media, what do we do in those spaces in terms of navigating that process in a helpful way? Which isn't something we think about when we saying, look at my kid's teeth.
Yeah, exactly. Jana, anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think the whole social media thing I'm very aware of at this point, really. We're having 2 adopted kids, and at this point I can control social media, but what am I going to do when my daughter is 16 and she goes on her own journey? So, but I think we'll cross that bridge when we get there. And just to support and encourage her to do any possible contact she might want to have through the social worker. I think that's really the most important, as Alexa said. But I think, social media does make me a bit wary with regards to this.
Explore other challenges that might arise, and both you and Alexa clearly have very supportive partners who've embraced this notion of adoption so fundamentally. But if you extend it beyond the bounds of just you and your husband, what about other family members and their attitudes, community attitudes towards adoption? What have your experiences been?
So when we initially decided to adopt, we sat our families down and said, this is our plan. We want to adopt children. And they've all been very supportive, which has been fantastic. So they've accepted our kids as much as any biological kids that are in the family. We've got 2 very doting grannies, which are very helpful and very involved in both our children's lives. And we've had a very, very supportive family. I think we're very lucky. You don't always get that, but very supportive and very helpful. So that's been a great experience from us.
Alexa, what's your experience been?
Again, we've got a great family support. Our family is excited about our son, which is helpful. I think we're quite conscious of language that gets used around our child, because our thing is always, as he grows, what is he going to interpret by that language? So an example would be where we've sat in a gathering and people say, you're not going to have your own child still. And my response is, I do have my own child, he's right here. And it's little things like that that we're a bit hyper-vigilant about, not because we're trying to nitpick or be oversensitive, but because we're trying to protect our child as he grows up, knowing where he belongs. I think in terms of community, I've had experiences where I've had people come and talk to me out of curiosity. I've had some people that are just plain nosy in shops ask very inappropriate questions about...
That's because your child is black and you are white.
We stick out.
Yes.
We're conspicuous. I feel a bit like, Heat Magazine's Circle of Shame. I need to make sure I'm dressed properly when I go to the shop so I don't embarrass my son. We stick out. People notice you. I've had a cashier come up to me at moved branches of Woolworths and say to me, I remember you. And I went, oh. She says, I recognize you and your son. And I was like, oh, thank you for noticing and caring. But and just very encouraging and supportive. I've also had people give me very dirty looks and be very off towards us. In
fact, you wrote in your blog, people glaring at you.
I've had people glaring at me when I walk through the shop with my child, at which point I smile and go, isn't he very cute?
Well, that's very disarming.
Yeah, well, he is very disarming once you get to know him. So I'm sure Jana's kids are as well. But it's just we have had experiences like that, or people who stop me randomly and say, what are you going to do about the culture? And someone who I don't even know what your name is, who's asking me what am I going to do about circumcision with my son, things like that.
And it sounds like more of a challenge than actually an inquiry.
And I just think it's really nosy and inappropriate, because my rule of thumb is if you're not close enough to me to ask, then maybe you shouldn't, or if you don't know, if you're not close enough to me to know, then maybe you shouldn't be asking. Having said that though, I think there are a lot of people that are interested in adoption, and we're seeing more and more cross and transracial adoptions, and so...
Just given the demographics of South Africa, it's going to be a reality.
And so how do we navigate that? So as adoptive parents, what skills do we need to help navigate that space? And I've learned a good question is help me understand what you're trying to ask, because then we can filter through very quickly what's actually going on.
Well, because I saw one of the stats was that we have got 1.8 million adoptable babies, very few of them white, just given the demographics. If you want to adopt, there is every likelihood the option is going to be adopting a black baby. Then questions will be asked. Well, how do we stay loyal to that child's culture and its upbringing? A friend of mine has adopted a black baby, and they're Jewish, and they're now looking at how do we marry these two. Their solution has been to just let it play its own course. We'll figure it out as we go.
Yeah.
And that's working, funny enough. I would have thought you'd want some prep on it. What would your advice be to people who are now saying, well, we'd like to do this, but we're not sure how to approach this issue of culture?
I think so I'm saying this as adoptive mom as well as a professional who's worked with children on the other side. I think there's a few things. The one is that children take their lead from us in any situation. So whether it's trauma, whether it's adoption, whatever it is, children take their lead from the adults, giving them permission. I think Jana referenced it earlier that, whatever our children ask, we need to actually be able to answer them honestly and openly and have the freedom to do that. When it comes to the culture thing, my encouragement is always find a person, if you know your child's culture of origin, find a person who can mentor you in that. That's the first thing. So if you're a Jewish family with a black child, what does that mean in terms of the faith base that you're going to raise your child in is the one part. But the other part is how you're going to integrate and assimilate, and not appropriate, because that's a big thing, but how do we assimilate different aspects of things together and give our child permission to explore that. And there's a brilliant, may I punt a book?
Go, please.
There's a brilliant book called Inside Transracial Adoption. It's written, we need South African resources, but it's written by 2 Americans, and one is a Jewish mom of a black child, actually. By Steinberg and Hall, and they explore all of these issues. And obviously in South Africa we've got a different context. It's easier because our children's cultures of origin are here, they're local. But how do you navigate all of those things? And they're important questions to ask, because when my son is an adult black man and he walks into a room, no one's going to care that his mom was Peach, to quote some of my kids.
Yes.
And so how do we navigate that space? And for me, the answer has been to find mentors to help me navigate the cultural stuff, looking at my faith and our family, our spirituality. How do we integrate all of those things in a way that honors our son, but also gives him freedom to become who he wants to be and who he chooses?
Jana, anything to add to what Alexa is saying there?
Yeah, again, we've had the experience that when people, obviously they know the kids are adopted, they presume they can ask questions that are fairly personal. They often presume the sort of questions are asked: why did the mother give her up, or was she young, or was she old, or what was her circumstances? And our decision has been not to tell anyone but our children their stories from their birth mother in an age-appropriate way, and they can share with strangers what they want to. So we've just had the experience that people presume they can ask quite personal questions for whatever reason. If someone has a biological child, I don't go to ask them, how did you fall pregnant? And I want a detailed explanation of the process that went through for them and their husband to fall pregnant. So I think people just presume they can ask questions, and it's often out of ignorance, and you just have to take it with a bag of salt and answer in a kind way. And those questions that are totally inappropriate, as Alexa says, you just question them on that again. But our skin it grows thicker as adoptive parents with regards to answering questions. But I think that most people are just interested and curious, and they just don't know how to approach talking about the subject in an appropriate way.
I suppose it's easier if you are being asked out of curiosity rather than in being challenged on your life decisions. I can imagine you'd have different approaches. What for you, though, is the most common question that you are constantly asked about being a parent who's adopted children?
Why did the mother give her up, and was she very young, are the two most common questions. Let me just put a dummy in the mouth here.
You go ahead and put dummies in the mouth. Alexa, for you, what are you most often asked?
Is his mom still alive? And the other one that we've had a lot is the circumcision. He's Xhosa, so circumcision is a big thing. And is his mother still alive? That's the one question we get all the time. I suppose the other one is where was he before he came to you? So.
Are you ever asked, can you choose your own child?
Yes.
And the answer is no, isn't it?
No, you don't choose your own child. This, for me, was actually, in terms of the process, was one of the hardest parts of the prep process, is you get to give parameters around what it is that you are willing to accept, which sounds terrible. As Jana said, it's not like getting a car, but you are able to say the age of the child, the race of the child, within, as you've very correctly identified, the majority of our babies that are eligible for adoption are going to be black babies, around HIV status, around special needs that are known, around so far as to how far premature the baby potentially was at birth, and anything else that comes with that. So those are all questions, if known, that you are allowed to specify and put down. With our abandoned babies, obviously, then a lot of that stuff becomes unknown stuff.
Yes.
So.
It's not like ordering a burger at Rocker Mama's. For you, Jana, when it came to the choice of baby, well, you don't, as Alexa's saying, there is no choice. Did you have parameters?
No, our preference really was just initially for a girl, and then we had a few other parameters that we set, but the more parameters you set, the more difficult you make it for yourself to get a baby. So if you're going to be very specific about they must have this color eye and that particular hair and this skin color and that age, then it does make your life as an adoptive parent, or your wait, it makes your wait potentially longer. So our initial parameter was just a girl, and then and with the second one again was a girl, because we just felt with quite a big age gap that two girls would probably work more successfully with regards to siblings and bonding. So that's really what our parameters were mostly.
As we start wrapping up, Jana, where would you advise people to go for if they want to read up? What kind of resources have you relied upon that are easily accessible to assist you with this journey?
So initially, when we started 4 years ago, there weren't many resources, really, unfortunately. And I trawled the internet to try and read up as much about adoption as I could. Most of it was from the States, as Alexa said. There was a website called Adopt Mom. I don't know if that still exists, that I read through initially. And then adoption.org also has quite a good website. But the best thing to do is actually to contact the adoption agency, whichever one you choose to go with. They all of them, or the ones we've used, have information days or information sessions, and that's when you get most of your information with regards to the adoption processes and that. And then there are now there are blogs like Alexa's blog that talks about adoption that will also give you a lot more information. You know, it's grown a lot in the 4 years since we've adopted our first child with regards to the information you can get. But I also recommend hooking up with people who have adopted, speaking to them and learning about their experience. You know, this forum that we on now, this is great because this is what really educates people, and this is where you can get a real true story. So that'll be my advice, really.
Well, Jana, I'll let you go. You've got a little feisty one on the floor there, and we do appreciate the way she's been incredibly tolerant and provided, I thought, a very nice background soundtrack to this conversation. But I do thank you very much for your time.
Great. Thank you very much, David.
So much. Jana Zuidema there. Alexa, as we start wrapping up, you agreed with adoption.org.za.
Adoption.org.
I said elections.org. That's a different process.
Very different.
Yeah, very topical at the moment. But adoption.org.za. Is that a good resource?
It's adoption.org. There's no ZA.
No ZA.
So there's that, and then there's a Facebook group for South African moms and dads, prospective parents. You don't have to have adopted, called Passionate About Adoption, that you can join. And there people do tell their stories, not just their stories. They tell the things that are easy. They tell the things that are hard. We had a campaign called Fix Adoption SA, where people could come and talk through some of the challenges of changing your child's name from their birth name into their family name now. Because one of the most beautiful things about adoption is that you get issued a certificate from the Department of Social Development that says this child is yours now as if born unto you, with all the rights of natural parents. And part of that is that your child gets to have his name match your name. And so a lot of those stories came out around some of those challenges, and it's a good place to access resources if you're South African, is passionate about adoption, and then also there's Adopt and Foster SA for parents who are fostering in this space. Well,
it seemed to me when I went through the adoption.org website and looking at the frequently asked questions, it seemed a lot of the answers, they'd give you a snapshot of an answer, but they would always say, you can go to your adoption agency or social worker. Yeah. So I think for anybody who's really pursuing this, find an adoption agency, find a social worker. So with your social worker's hat on, I noticed, if you could answer these questions, I see a lot of the questions were asked about finances. Do I need to have money? Do I need to be above minimum wage? Do I need to be wealthy? It's not an issue, is it?
No, you don't need to be wealthy at all. You need to be able to look after a child.
And so assessments are the key.
Assessments are key. And I think the important part of the adoption process is people say, oh, so is it so? Another common question is, how expensive was it to get your child? Okay, we're not paying for a child. We're paying for an assessment process. We're paying for professionals. We're paying for screenings. We're paying for medical bills. Because every child that goes through the adoption process, whether through the Department of Social Development or Child Welfare or a private agency, has a full medical. So we get a full screen of blood tests for a baby. That's 1,800 Rand for those, more or less, unpacked costs. And that's what those costs are covering. So your costing there, depending on your means, depends on the route you're going to choose. And so some agencies are funded or are going to be more fully funded, which means that that's where our tax money is going, which I celebrate because I'm obviously an adoption advocate. And I think it's a good use of our tax resources. But some of our private agencies are not fully funded, but will have a sliding scale depending on how much funding there is available to be able to do that. So I would encourage people who are interested in adoption to just look around and have a look and ask different questions and ask social workers and ask agencies, do you do a sliding scale? Do you have a payment plan option if you decide that actually this agency is the right fit, this feels right for your family, but you can't pay this off in one go. So there's different ways of doing that. And something I would love to see happen, it happens in the States, is to actually have funding available for parents who do want to adopt but cannot afford adoption costs, even the minimal costs. I think that's an amazing way of getting our kids into families.
Well, I'd also noticed through a lot of the questions, the issue like, can gay people adopt? Yes.
Yes.
But assessments are done. Any parent, whether you're a heterosexual couple, assessments will be done. You will always be screened to see, are you are you somebody who can adopt?
Because it's about the child. And
Yes.
I think the important part here is, as parents, we want to have a child, but we, as social workers, we're looking for the right parents for this child. So who is the right parent? Who's going to best parent this child? Where's the best fit for this child? And it's a child-centered process. It's a child-driven process in terms of where the focus is.
I often find, though, it's through storytelling that I learn the most. And I thought your story that you write about so wonderfully on your blog was the most important research I could have done ahead of this interview. Where do people find it? I know it's WordPress. It's a long. So I had the link to click on,
Okay.
and I think that will be available on this Iris Session website. But for those who are jotting down notes now,
it's the outrageousintrovert.wordpress.com.
The Outrageous Introvert.
I'm actually an introvert by nature.
But outrageously so.
Outrageously so. This is my passion. I can talk for hours.
The Outrageous Introvert.
.wordpress.com. I haven't blogged for a little while. I've been too busy momming to be doing
I'm
much
going to
blogging.
kick your backside, get you blogging again. You write so well.
I'll write on the plane going home.
Please do.
So,
Alexa, thank you very much.
thank you.
My thanks to our guests. I hope you've enjoyed this Iris session. I hope that you've got a lot of food for thought. And if you are a family that's looking to adopt, I hope we pointed you in the right direction. Look forward to seeing you again on the next Iris session, brought to you by Bright Rock. I'm David O'Sullivan. Bye-bye.